Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first ever global chocolate tasting for the clients and friends of Presilium Private Wealth. We're really excited to spend the next hour with you learning about everything chocolate together. With so many of our great friends here, I wanted to make two important announcements before we get started. First, on September 26th, we rebalanced your investment accounts. You have all had excellent results this year, and we plan to build on them by continuing to rebalance and take advantage of any opportunities that the market gives us. Second, in November, we are again hosting two of our extremely popular wine tasting events on the 16th and the 30th of the month. We love these opportunities to enjoy time with all of you outside of finance and hope that all of you can join us. Also, please feel free to invite your friends and family. These special events are a great opportunity to introduce us to anyone important to you who may be interested in learning more about the exceptional services available here at Presilium. If you're interested in joining us and have not yet signed up, please email Kelly and she will take care of everything. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Jessica, who's going to guide us through an amazing chocolate tasting. Please feel free to add any questions you may have to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. We have all really been looking forward to this event.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I am super excited as well. Usually the first question I get started with is, did anybody break into their chocolate kits before today? Was anyone so excited they could not wait? Because when I get chocolate in the mail at my house, I always break into it right away. If you haven't already started breaking into your kit, you can go ahead and open the box, start to look at what's in there. I think it's always fun to kind of have an idea of what you think might be your favorite. And then at the end, we'll revisit that and see what was your actual favorite. And then as you unpack your box, you might notice something that looks like an almond. This is a roasted cacao bean. And this is what we're going to start with. But before we get to this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where chocolate comes from. So chocolate is actually from the fruit of a tropical rainforest tree. The trees grow about 20 degrees north and south of the equator, which is why you'll see the number 20 in a lot of chocolate brands. As I said before, the trees grow in the tropical rainforest, so they're very much a part of the ecosystem. The only state in the United States that can actually grow cacao trees commercially is Hawaii. So if you've ever taken a vacation to Hawaii, there's probably at least one cacao farm tour on every island at this point. The industry in Hawaii did not used to be that big. It's grown leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. So maybe if you're in Hawaii, you can find a tree and you can sample the fruit for yourself. The fruit looks something like this. Actually, it looks exactly like this. This is a real cacao pod. I happened to be at the Northwest Chocolate Festival last week, and if they have any left over, my friends at Meridian Cacao give these to me. So this is the cacao fruit. It is about a week old, so I can kind of feel that the inside has dried a little bit. It starts fermenting as soon as it's harvest, and it's got a little bit of degradation on the bottom, but I'm not going to eat this fruit. I saved it to show to all of you today. I'm going to chop this open and plant the seeds. So in a model, you can see what's inside the fruit. This is what I normally use when I don't have a real one. What happens is somebody hand harvests the fruit off the tree. So no matter where you get your chocolate, what type it is, how much you paid for it, somebody will hand harvest the fruit. They'll then break it open, and inside is the seeds covered in a white sticky pulp. So the seeds are what we get new chocolate trees from. That's what I'll be planting. And then the white sticky pulp is the fruit. So that's what animals and people would eat when they can get the fresh fruit. The pulp is very difficult to get in the US, but occasionally you can find some dried cacao fruit or some cacao fruit pouches, like the pulp in pouches, which are fun because the white part actually tastes like a mango. It's a citrus fruit. Tastes completely different than what you expect chocolate to taste like. To make chocolate, the entire inside part here is fermented for about a week and dried for about a week, so it's stable for storage and shipping. The fermentation and drying is really important to the final flavor of the chocolate, but we're going to skip it for now. And if anyone wants, I can come back to how those seeds and pulp are fermented and dried. When the chocolate maker gets the dried cacao beans, the first thing they do is sort through them. So large makers typically do this with a machine. Smaller makers, which is what I'm featuring here today, typically do this by hand. And you just want to make sure that nothing you don't want in your chocolate made it into that bag of cacao beans. So depending on where you get your beans from, there might be rocks, sticks, chicken feathers, that kind of thing. So all of that needs to come out. And then the chocolate maker roasts the cacao beans. So that is what we're starting with, is the roasted cacao bean. So you might want to get a napkin. There's napkins in your kit. And then you're going to crack this open and peel off the shell. Now, if you've already eaten the shell, it's fine. It won't hurt you. It just doesn't taste very good. It's a lot thicker than like an almond shell, so it does have some texture you might not like. Inside is what we call the nib, and that is edible. It is 100% cacao, no sugar added. So if you don't like bitter things, if you're not used to black coffee, for example, you might not want to take the entire inside part and eat it, maybe just a small piece. This is really just to give you an idea of how chocolate starts. So a lot of people love the nibs. Usually about 10% of people are like, where can I get another nib? The rest of the 90%, including myself, want a little sugar with our chocolate. So these beans came to me in a big bag of raw beans. They had already been pre-sorted, and then I just and then I roasted them in my home oven. You can roast beans in your home oven. You can make chocolate in a blender. This is something you can temper by hand. So you can make chocolate at home, but usually when people get into it, they have small scale machinery. They start in their garage or a workshop or something, and then they move up as they go from farmers markets to their own store to larger companies. So we have the entire breadth that we're going to cover with today's chocolate samples. All right, so everyone's had a chance to try the bean. I hope at least some of you liked it. In order to make a chocolate bar from that 100% nib, the nibs, so without the shells, are put into a grinder. So the machine that grinds the beans, the time they grind it for, the temperature will all vary by the chocolate maker. And it might even vary within, like one chocolate maker might use different settings for different bean types from around the world. We'll talk about how they're different later, but all of that is not standardized. That's up to the chocolate maker to get the best flavor out of those chocolate beans. But we're going to average and just say they grind for about 3 days. When they're done grinding, they would add some sugar, maybe at the last couple hours, grind the sugar in, take that out, temper it, and pour it into a bar mold. So we're actually going to start now with the large Maru bar. This is your full-size bar. This is a lot of chocolate. I sent you much chocolate, so you do not feel like you have to eat it all during this hour. If you want to taste tiny samples, you can. If you're watching the recording and you want to come take a break, you can do that as well. So this is from a company called Maru out of Vietnam. It was founded by 2 French expats who are really interested in revitalizing the cacao industry in Vietnam. A couple of things you might notice about the wrapper. The first thing is Tiangiang 70% single origin dark chocolate. So what that means is all of the beans that made this bar came from a single region. So Maru, I have their map right here, and I know you can't read this, but you can see the colors. Maru makes single origin dark chocolate from several different regions. They're colored here. And all of these single origin bars will taste different from each other. They come in like a small variety pack, or you can buy, 6 full-size bars. And they taste different from each other because the different types of trees growing in those different regions are different genetic varietals. So very much like wine, cacao trees come in different varietals. A Merlot grape is always going to give you a Merlot flavored wine. It's never going to give you a Pinot flavored wine. And it's the same with cacao trees. So depending on which scientific paper you're up on, there are 11 very well established, maybe 15 genetic types of cacao trees right now. So this one, Tiangyang, that's the region all of those beans are from. It's across several farms, but not outside the region. And then the 70% is the amount of bean in there. For a really good quality product like this, the math is very simple. The rest is sugar. So it's 30% sugar. So if you haven't already, please feel free to open up the bar. You want to snap off a piece. I like to smell it before I put it in my mouth. And then when you put it in your mouth, you don't want to eat very quickly. And I like to say you wouldn't pay a lot of money for a very expensive bottle of wine and then guzzle it down like you would a bottle of water. So you're not going to pay a lot of money for a Kraft chocolate bar and then eat it like you would a candy bar. So Kraft chocolate has a couple things different than industrially made chocolate. And the first thing is that the beans are processed for the flavor. So I already said that the maker might vary the machines they use. They might even vary the time. They might even vary how they process the beans from year to year, because harvest to harvest would be slightly different. Just like in wine, you have different vintages. In chocolate bars, you have different harvest years. And industrial chocolate is really made to be a consistent product. It's consistent from year to year, factory to factory. A Hershey bar is always going to taste like a Hershey bar. Kraft chocolate, however, is really made to be the best, most flavorful product it can be. So it will vary from farm to farm. It will vary from harvest year to harvest year. All right, so as everybody hopefully enjoyed their Tiangyang, and then we'll move on to our next chocolate, which will be a little Askinosie sample. Where did I put mine? Oh, I forgot. I put crackers in here. If you want to use the crackers to cleanse your palate, I recommend using crackers and water. It should be warm water, but we're not going to be that picky. If we were judging a chocolate competition, we would be very careful about cleansing our palate in between samples. We would use cold polenta with no salt added. The soupy texture really helps get rid of all of the flavor and all of the fat. For this tasting, I just sent you oyster crackers with no salt in them. And if you're going to use those, you want to just nibble them between your front teeth. Don't chew them in your back molars, or else the cracker is stuck there and whatever you eat next will be a little cracker flavor. I actually have some certificates in wine appreciation as well as chocolate flavor. And I went for 2 years to wine classes and no one ever told me not to chew the oyster crackers. So I did for many years. So this is my tip to you, no matter what you're tasting, just nibble it in your front teeth. So this is the little Askinosie sample. Askinosie is a company in Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, founded by Sean Askinosie, and then his daughter Lauren later joined. And they really focus on direct sourcing and transparency in their cacao beans. And that's why I wanted to add this little sample in, because the other thing that Kraft chocolate does that industrial chocolate does not do is it focuses on having a transparent and traceable supply chain. So a lot of times that means direct sourcing, which means that the chocolate maker, in this case, Sean Askinosie, has a contract directly with the farmers growing the beans. And that way, the farmers get training on how to properly ferment and dry the beans so that they are at their best quality to make the best final chocolate end products. And then Askinosie chocolate typically pays those farmers depending on the year, because commodity prices of cocoa beans fluctuate, but depending on the year, about 30 to 50% times more than the commodity price for cocoa beans. So the farmers get more money, so it works out well for everybody. So if you have this little product, you can compare it to the taste of this one. So these beans were grown different places in the world, and they should taste completely different. And then because these are 2 different chocolate makers, 2 different factories, 2 different places, they also might have a slightly different texture. I find they have a different texture. I personally find the Maru bar to be a lot smoother because the French expats will typically make their chocolate in a European style, which is a very smooth style. And American chocolate tends to be, I would not call it gritty, I would just call it not as smooth. So hopefully you can tell the difference between those two products. If you have a little bit of this left over, I'll let you know. I sent you 2 different flavor wheels. So the first one is just in the insert. This is the one I typically use. This is a nice basic flavor wheel. This is what you want to pay attention to in the dark chocolate when you're kind of letting it melt in your mouth, moving it around. We have texture, the sweet versus sour, bitter versus astringent, and finish. So texture, obviously, it's how smooth it is in your mouth and how quickly it melts. Sweet and sour is those 2 things need to be in balance. If this chocolate is too sweet, the sweetness just overpowers everything and you don't get a lot of flavors. Same with the sour. Bitter and astringency, just like in wine, really give the chocolate structure. So you do want some bitterness there, but if it's too much, again, it overpowers everything else and it's not a pleasant experience. Finish is what is left in your mouth after you finish swallowing your chocolate. So the finish can be long or short. It can be pleasant or unpleasant. What we're going for with craft chocolate is a long, pleasant finish. This is my simplified flavor wheel. This is where I like to start out with. So when you taste the chocolate, you might taste something fruity, something nutty. You don't necessarily need to put a lot of words to it. Really what we're focusing on is this very simple question: do I like this chocolate again? Do I want to buy this? Do I want to give this as a gift? And if the answer is no, then you know that's something you don't like and you can move on. If the answer is yes, you might notice, oh, well, I like all fruity chocolate or I like all nutty chocolate. I did send another flavor wheel. This is from Counterculture Coffee. And this is the one I personally use, even though it's a coffee flavor wheel. There are flavor wheels or aroma wheels for almost anything that can be tasted. There's ones for wine, is the original one, which was developed by Ann Noble at UC Davis, I believe. And then there's cheese, there's apples, there's whiskey, there's everything. I like the coffee one very much. The part on the bottom doesn't really apply to chocolate, but all of these flavors also appear in chocolate. And the way that you use this is you start very simple. So you would start near the center and you would say, oh, this is kind of fruity. And so then you would say, oh, it's kind of like a stone fruit, like a peach. So you just go out from the center and get more and more specific. I find the mistake a lot of people use when they get a flavor wheel like this is they put the food in their mouth and they start reading around the edge. And the food is gone from your mouth before you get a quarter around the edge. And you don't really get to use it so much. All right, so on to our third sample. So everybody has a little fire tree bar. There were a couple different fire tree bars that went out. These are from the UK, from a company called Fire Tree. The reason they're called Fire Tree is 2 things. First of all, when the cocoa tree is heavily weighed down with these amazing like red and yellow and orange fruits, from far away it kind of looks like the tree itself is on fire. And the other reason is all of the beans that they source are from the volcanic islands in the Pacific Rim of Fire. So they're from different islands and they do have slightly different tastes, but they're all in that volcanic soil. So they're all, in a relatively small area. And so you can go ahead and try your fire tree. And then I did want to talk just briefly about tasting notes. So with this bar, you have tasting notes on the back. I have a love-hate relationship with tasting notes. They can be very helpful if you're experiencing something, but you just can't put a word to it. Sometimes the tasting notes or the flavor wheel will help you identify that experience you're having. However, I also find that when you read tasting notes and you don't experience what is written, sometimes people feel bad, which is completely unnecessary. This is just what somebody tasted, not what everyone should taste. But they also spend a lot of time maybe looking for that. So if, for example, the tasting notes say strawberry and you put the chocolate in your mouth, you're really going to be searching for strawberry and you might miss pineapple, and that pineapple would have been really enjoyable for you. So I actually typically eat most of my chocolate without reading the tasting notes. The only time I read tasting notes is at the end, or if I'm in the store trying to figure out what to buy, what do I like, or what to pair with wine. So a lot of times I pair chocolate with wine. In this case, the way that I do it really simple is you have a varietal of wine that you're going to open for your event or your evening. If the tasting notes in the chocolate would be appropriate on the back of the bottle of wine, then it will probably go well together. There's a lot more to it, but that's the simple way. So if you're reading a chocolate bar and it says notes of toffee and you're opening a Pinot Noir, those would not go well together. Toffee Pinot Noir is not something you would find on the back of a Pinot Noir bottle. If you're reading the back and it says lovely plum, maybe dried raisin, well, those things would be good in a Pinot Noir, so the chocolate would probably pair well. That's the simplified version of tasting notes. All right, let me grab a drink here. The other thing I wanted to say, if you have some chocolate that you did not like and you do not have anyone that you're going to share the rest of your chocolate bar with, you don't have to throw it away. It's very easy to make a drinking chocolate with the rest of your chocolate bar. Any of these plain chocolates that we've had so far will make a good drinking chocolate. And what you're going to do is break off some of the chocolate. Now, I like mine very thick and strong, so I would use probably half of this bar. You might use a little more or less. I'm going to put it in a microwavable mug with a tablespoon of water, microwave it 15 seconds. Now, this is the hardest part. You have to whisk very well. You have to get all of the chocolate melted into that water. And then you're going to add liquid, as much or as little as you like. So traditionally, you would add a cup of milk. That's how we typically make like hot chocolate. But you can add more than a cup. You can add less than a cup, depending on how thick you want your beverage. You can add water instead of milk if you want more of the chocolate flavor to shine through. You can add heavy cream if you want it really, really thick. We would call that like a chocolate truffle. You can add any of the dairy alternative milks. So that's really up to you. And then you can add any flavoring to it as you like. So if you want to add some spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, those are very popular. You can add any syrups you have. If you have any spiced creamer, you can do that. Or if you want to add a little whiskey, you can make it into a little mini chocolate cocktail. So it's a really good way to use chocolate. Sometimes I get chocolate that comes to me and it has been melted. Cannot be sent out. It could be if I was at the factory and I had a melted chocolate bar, you can just throw it back into the tempering machine. It'll melt down, temper, come out beautifully. I'm not going to bother to temper like an ounce of chocolate, even though I could. Theoretically, it would take a long time. So I usually make all of that into drinking chocolate. And the thing about drinking chocolate that's so much better than hot chocolate is this has the cocoa butter fat from the chocolate in it. So it's silky, it's luxurious, and it's really lovely. I suggest you try it even if maybe you like the chocolate bar. So that is it for our plain dark chocolates. So when I got into chocolate about 20 years ago, I went to a tasting very similar to this. And that's really exactly what we tasted, was a whole bunch of plain single origin dark chocolates. I fell in love with it. And I went to lots of tastings and tasted lots of 70% single origin bars from lots of different makers from all over the world, lots of different genetic varietals of beans. But I think the consumers got bored. Like everybody at first was amazed that chocolate could taste different based on where it came from. But at some point, people got bored. I think the makers got bored too. And so eventually they started adding things into their chocolate. So anything in chocolate that is not cocoa beans and sugar is called an inclusion, and the rest of our tasting is inclusion bars. So we're actually going to start with the company we had before. So this is Maru Bar, and with this one, they took, I'll keep putting things down and losing them. They took these beans from Tianqian and they added some powdered kumquat. So kumquat is a small, thin-skinned citrus fruit. It's native to Florida, where I grew up. So our neighbors had kumquat trees, and I used to eat them all the time. But if you grew up probably north of Florida, you may have never had a kumquat before. So this is a small citrus fruit. Citrus would be acidic, and if you like, the acid in the bar, you would call it, oh, that's nice and fruity. If you don't like it, you might say that's very sour. But everybody's experiencing the same thing, which is that acidity in the chocolate. I personally think it's fun to try different foods that I've never tried before through chocolate. There are a lot of chocolate makers out there who are really trying to express their culture through their cuisine in the chocolate. There's a shrimp bar, there is a seaweed bar, there's mushroom bars, there's people put anything in chocolate these days. And I think it's super fun. My favorite maker right now is, you can't buy it in the US, as far as I know, except for very, very small locations carry it, is a Siamaya from Thailand. And they're kind of creating all of the curries that they eat in Thailand into their chocolate bars. And that includes adding things like shallots or tomatoes into the chocolate. But it's wonderful. It turns out well. All right, so that is our smooth dark chocolate. Again, it was made in that very European, very super smooth style. And that is in contrast to the next dark chocolate sample, which is the Taza. So Taza is from Massachusetts. They have right on their label, Mexican style stone ground chocolate. Now, I'm not a fan of the Mexican style on here because chocolate or cacao has been enjoyed for thousands of years. And for many of those years, it was a drink in most of South and Central America where the trees grew. And there was not one specific way that people in what is modern day Mexico used the cacao over those thousands of years. It kind of, evolved over time with them. The other thing is, throughout Mexico, people have access to different foods and flavors. And so they make their drinking chocolate, they still enjoy it as a drink, different in different regions. So just like there's not one curry in India and there's not one marinara sauce in Italy, there's not one style of chocolate in Mexico. But they named it this because that's kind of homage to where the founders of this company encountered this texture of chocolate. So stone ground in this case means when they put it into the grinder, they did not grind it for very long. So this is complete opposite to the smooth texture. I call this delicious sand, and I have asked the company if it's okay if I call it delicious sand. They've said it's fine as long as I use the word delicious. And this is kind of fun because this is how chocolate was traditionally made before we had really large machines that could grind the chocolate into very small pieces. And then if you don't like this one, you can make it into a drink exactly the same way as I described before. That texture will disappear because the chocolate will just be incorporated into the liquid. And then this one, if you look on the back, it has all kinds of certifications. I didn't talk too much about the other two chocolates, but they are also traceable. If you go to Taza's website, you can click back through where we get our beans, where we use direct sourcing. They have a transparency report that's published every year. So you can really find out more exactly where your beans came from and what was paid for them. And that transparency keeps anyone from taking advantage of people along the supply chain. So it's a little bit more equitable, but mostly it's more fair in the end. So I hope you like Delicious Sand. If this is your favorite chocolate, you are in luck because this is one of two brands that I feature that are sometimes available in larger stores like Earth Fare or World Market. Does not carry Taza, they carry some other stuff. Whole Foods, that's what I was thinking of. So, and these are not over in the aisle by the chocolate bars. These are on like a freestanding podium over in the bakery. So I would suggest, if you like the texture, to buy the variety pack. I think they have 6 or 7 different variety packs, and they have a lot of holiday flavors too. I actually just got my eggnog flavor in for Christmas just last week. So yeah, you can try these, try the variety pack, see which one you like. They have a plain dark, they have 100% dark, they have 2 with 2 different kinds of chilies if you like really spicy chilies in your chocolate. So that is the end of the dark chocolate. And then I did put some jelly beans in your kit. I'm sure you were wondering why you had jelly beans in a kit full of chocolate. And this is because it's a little activity I like to lead people through to kind of illustrate how much of your sense of flavor is actually aroma and not taste. So if you would like to do the activity, and if you've never done it before, I recommend it. It's super, super fun. What you're going to do is take out one of the Jelly Bellies from the packet, any color but red, and I'll tell you why you can't use red in a minute. You're going to get the jelly bean ready. You're going to hold your nose shut, completely shut. You can't cheat. You're going to put the jelly bean in your mouth, chew a few times, ask yourself, what am I tasting? What flavor is this? You're going to release your nose, and you're going to continue chewing as you breathe in and out of your nose, just like you normally would, until you finish your jelly bean. I'm going to let anyone who's tasting along with us do that. So if you didn't cheat, what happens is you should not have been able to tell anything about the flavor of the Jelly Belly while you had your nose pinched shut. And that's because jelly beans are really just sugar and aromatic molecules. There's no real food in there. So there's really nothing to taste except for the sweetness of the sugar. If you had gotten the red one, that is cinnamon. And if you happen to have a cinnamon one, you would have actually felt the cinnamon. If you have cinnamon or black pepper or chili peppers, all of those things are actually felt in your mouth by your touch receptors, your temperature sensitive receptors, specifically the heat receptor. And so that's why we would say cinnamon is a warming spice or chili peppers are hot. And it's because they actually activate our heat receptors in our mouth. Conversely, if you chew a piece of mint gum or you have a candy cane over the holidays, mint actually activates your cool receptors, so your cold sensitive receptors in your mouth. So there are no mint ones in the assortment, but there are cinnamon ones. So when you put the jelly bean in your mouth, all you do is use your 5 taste receptors. You don't get any of the aromas until you release your nose. And when you release your nose, what happens is as you breathe out, kind of pull the air out of your mouth, and it comes out through your nose, and you smell exactly the same as you would as when you smell in. And of course, there are directional sensors in your nose. So your brain knows which way the air is moving. It knows where those smells are coming from, and it knows it's coming from your mouth. And so your brain does this thing where it just kind of puts everything together in one location, even though a lot of what you're sensing or experiencing is aroma and not taste. The fancy word for this is a retronasal olfaction, but you can just think of it as, you smell the food in your mouth. So if you ever have a cold and you think food doesn't taste quite right, it actually tastes just fine. The problem is you can't smell it, and so it doesn't seem quite right. And if you ever get tricked into playing the Jelly Belly Bean Boozled game, or you have the terrible Harry Potter flavors, if you want to win the game or not experience the terribleness, all you have to do is plug your nose, because all of the bad flavors are the exact same thing. They're just sugar and food-safe aromatic molecules. You can do this experiment with wine. You can do it with chocolate. You can do it with an apple and a potato. You can't tell the difference. However, I like to use the Jelly Bellies because the aroma is so strong that usually the experiment is not subtle, and so everyone can experience it. All right. I do see a question. Let me see if that has something to do with what I'm talking about real quick. Okay, I had a question about dark chocolate and high levels of metals like lead. How do you avoid those brands? Right now, you really can't specifically avoid those brands because we don't really know. Not a lot of testing is done on the beans at the source. A lot of craft chocolate makers, their response to this was just to send all of their final finished chocolate products off to a lab. I think it was something cheap, like $20 or $200 a test. They just got everything tested. They put it on their website that it's been tested. Don't worry about it. That was the easiest thing for them to do because the way cacao beans are sourced, especially for large brands, is they are aggregated, just like wine is blended. The cacao beans are blended to give that consistent flavor for the large brands. In the small things like we're talking about, for example, all of the beans from the volcanic islands haven't necessarily been tested. But I will say that what the president of the Fine Chocolate Industry Association did was she sent out a survey to all of the chocolate makers. And what she said was, would you give your chocolate to your children? And everybody said yes. So nobody's really worried about it. The other thing, if you want like a very more complete science answer, Greg De Alessandro from Dandelion Chocolate did an interview about the cadmium and lead he did a YouTube thing on Craft Chocolate TV, which is from Dylan out of Manoa Chocolate. But if you just go on YouTube and you look up Craft Chocolate TV, he's got like a 20-minute answer on that question. So I hope that answers it. I don't worry about it at all. It's just not something that we eat enough of to worry about. All right, so on to milk chocolate. So let's see, our first milk chocolate is from Original Beans. So this is a company out of Switzerland, and they source their beans from all over the world. It was founded by a conservationist, and what he was really interested in is, I believe it, you can very kind of see it on the bottom. It says, taste the rare and preserve it. So he's interested in preserving the rainforest by paying farmers more for their beans, so they continue to grow cacao trees, which are part of the tropical rainforest, instead of cutting down the trees that are on their land and planting something else like soy or something in a monoculture. So the idea is to kind of conserve the rainforest by keeping it profitable and sustainable for the farmers that live there, the people that live there. So these beans in particular came from Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There's a lovely, 90-minute documentary on Virunga on both Amazon Prime and Netflix if you're interested in learning more about the region there. The bar that's just the dark chocolate actually has the gorilla. It's like a purple bar with the gorilla on the front because that's the habitat of the mountain gorillas. Virunga National Park is. This one has the lovely ladies here because the beans for this one are from that region. They're specifically harvested and farmed by women farmers. So this is called the Femmes, or the women of Virunga. And this is a milk chocolate, the 55%. So the 55, again, is the amount of cocoa beans. The 45% would be some combination of milk powder and sugar. So in the United States, the legal minimum amount of cocoa beans that you need to have in a bar of chocolate to legally call it chocolate is 10%. Anything under 10% is called chocolate flavored or chocolatey. I don't recommend you eat those products. I'm not a chocolate snob. If you want to eat your Snickers or your Kit Kat, especially this month around Halloween, please feel free to enjoy your candy. But anything that didn't meet the 10%, like, you don't want that in your body. That's very unhealthy. It's mostly wax, actually. So getting back to the 55, because this has about 10 times more cocoa beans than your typical industrially made milk chocolate, it will have a lot more chocolate flavor. So a lot of times people who really like dark chocolate don't like milk chocolate because it tastes very sweet and sugary. They don't get a lot of cocoa flavor from it. Will like a product like this because it has a lot more chocolate flavor than they're used to a milk chocolate having. The last thing I wanted to say about Original Beans is if you go on the back of your bar, there is a QR code that will take you to their website. It will take you to the Virunga National Park information. And again, there's a transparency report on there. There's also a timeline. I particularly like the timeline because you can go back and sort through the pictures You can see when original beans started working with those farmers. You can see them plant trees from the nursery. You can see how many trees they planted per year, how many tons of beans they harvest and export, how much was paid for it, and all of that information. It's readily available again. So you have that transparency in sourcing. So that is our plain milk chocolate bar. It's nice and creamy. Just let it melt. It's a really enjoyable product because it has that creaminess of the milk in there. And then people like to add crunchy things to their milk chocolate as well. All kinds of inclusions in milk chocolate. The one I chose for this tasting is Quinoa Crunch. So this is from a company called Cacao Suyo out of Peru, and they're one of the most award-winning chocolate makers in the world. And very similar to the company I talked about in Vietnam, Cacao Suyo has a line of single origin dark chocolates from across Peru, and they source from different regions. So again, this is not all the way down to the farm level, but it is from different regions, and all of those chocolates taste very different from each other. I have a favorite, and a lot of other people have different favorites, so it's kind of fun to try all of those with a group of friends. It's one of the things you can do if you ever want to host your own chocolate tasting. But this one is Piura milk. So Piura is the region that the beans come from. And then milk, there's milk powder, and then they add the quinoa crunch. Sorry, this one does use the Piura beans, but it's quinoa crunch. So 40% beans from Piura, some amount of milk powder, some amount of sugar, and then puffed quinoa to give it some texture. So I find that when you put texture in a chocolate bar, it has a lot of snackability. So this is one that would be really easy to just consume the whole bar because it's lovely in texture, and you're not really putting forth a lot of effort to pay attention to the flavor of the chocolate like you would be in the bars we started with. All right. And then our next to last one is the J Coco Orange Cayenne Bar. So this is white chocolate. So white chocolate is made from the cocoa butter fat in the chocolate bar. I talked before about putting the nibs into a grinder. When you put the nibs into a grinder, you grind them for several days, and the heat, like the friction from the grinding, creates heat. And the heat melts the cocoa butter fat that's naturally present within the bean. The amount of cocoa butter varies based on the varietal of the bean and the weather that year. So that's why harvest would be somewhat different. So they would be more or less fatty beans. And then what you have in your grinder is kind of a peanut butter consistency type paste. And you can take a large hydraulic press. There are some other ways to do it, but most people do it with a large press. And you can press out the liquid fat cocoa butter. So when it's warm, it's a liquid. And then when it solidifies, it cools down and hardens. The cocoa fat can actually be added back into a different batch of chocolate, and to make it more smooth, the cocoa butter can be sold to the cosmetics industry. So if you go into your bathroom, there will surely be some product with cocoa butter in it. Cocoa butter is what melts at tongue temperature. That's what gives chocolate that amazing melt on your tongue, is that the fat is solid until it comes to that temperature, and then it begins to melt and turn into a liquid. So cocoa butter is what really carries the flavor of the chocolate bar. The other thing you can do with the cocoa butter is make white chocolate. So white chocolate is made from the cocoa butter fat that was in the bean that grew on the, came from the fruit that grew on the tree. I consider it to be real chocolate. There is also a legal standard of identity for chocolate, and cocoa butter is included in that. White chocolate is included in that. So I say white chocolate is real chocolate. Now, what's left in the press after you press out the cocoa butter is called cocoa powder. That's what we typically bake with. And because the press doesn't get 100% of the fat, there's still some fat in there, but mostly it's just cocoa solids. And a lot of people say that because white chocolate doesn't have those cocoa solids, it's not real chocolate. If you want to maintain that position, that's perfectly fine. I will let you maintain that position, but I think it's real chocolate. So back to the J Coco bar. J Coco, this bar has 30% cocoa butter in it. And then it has some orange and some cayenne. It's not spicy, but you're not going to miss it either. This is one that people are always really surprised they like. Most people don't think they like white chocolate because what they've experienced from the grocery store is something that's very like sweet milk, solid sweet milk, and they don't really enjoy it. This is a different type of product that most people really do enjoy. So two other things I wanted to mention. J Coco is the sister company of Seattle Chocolate Company. Both are owned by Jean Thompson. She was one of the investors in the Seattle Chocolate Company. Originally, when it burned to the ground, she was the only one that kind of wanted to start getting it going again, so she became the owner. She built Seattle Chocolate Company up and then launched J Coco as a sister brand because J Coco uses that transparent, traceable sourcing. All of the other bars in the J Coco line use cocoa beans, and those all come from Peru. They actually come from Cacasuyo in Peru. This one uses cocoa butter from, I forget where in Africa. I don't remember if it's Tanzania or Uganda, but all of the cocoa butter comes from, again, that transparent, traceable supply chain. It's on the website. If you go to their website, you can trace it back with a couple of clicks. And the last thing I wanted to say about J Coco is that Jean Thompson did an absolutely wonderful TED Talk. It's called A World Without Chocolate, and it's all about sustainability in the chocolate industry. And it's a nice 15-minute introduction to that topic. It's easily found on YouTube. And J Coco on the bottom, it says chocolate that feeds. 10% of the proceeds from all of the J Coco sales go to fight food insecurity. And then while I'm thinking about it, Sean Askinosi also did a TED Talk. I believe it was something along the lines of finding your calling, finding meaningful work. He wrote a book called Meaningful Work as well, but he had like a 15-minute TED Talk on finding what really gives you purpose in life. All right. And then our last sample is actually a confection. And I wanted to put this in here to show you that like candy is okay, but also to talk about the difference between a chocolate maker and a chocolatier. So a chocolate maker is somebody who takes those dried cacao beans and makes them into a chocolate bar. A chocolatier is somebody who takes pre-made chocolate and makes it into something delicious. So if you go to a fancy restaurant, a lot of those chefs are chocolatiers. They are not in the back of the restaurant grinding beans. They buy couverture, is what we call it, pre-made chocolate from someone else, and then they make delicious things, cakes, pies, bonbons, etc. with it. Mayana is a husband-wife couple in Spooner, Wisconsin, and they call themselves confectioners. So what they do is they make delicious confections, bonbons, and these are little candy bars with pre-made chocolate. They buy all their chocolate from Valrhona, and they buy a specific line of chocolate that, again, has that traceable, transparent supply chain. So this one is fun. It's a caramel that's topped with a layer of pumpkin spiced marshmallow, coated in a 66% dark chocolate. So if you've had enough chocolate, feel free to save this for later. But when I got these in a couple of weeks ago, like I said, as soon as it came in the house, opened it up and tried one and immediately ate the whole thing because it's delicious. I see we have two more questions here. From Eric, we have favorite chocolate brands pairing with different wines. I don't really have any favorite brands that I pair with wines. And I know this is going to be, oh, let's see, pairing with specific varietals. That's great. So what's going to happen is if you try to do it very randomly, like it's going to be difficult to pair chocolate and wine if you buy good quality chocolate. And so what I kind of have like an overall saying, I already talked about, if the tasty notes on the chocolate would go well on the back of the bottle of wine, that's going to be your best bet. So for example, the orange cruise I find goes really well with like a light white Pinot Grigio. It would not go well with a dark red. The quinoa crunch, believe it or not, goes really well with the tawny port. The pure milk does too. And that's because milk chocolate would have like toffee, caramel, honey notes. And those are things you might find in a port or like a dessert wine. If you're looking for more red wine, I'd try to stick with dark chocolate. It's just easier to find like a dark chocolate that would go with a red wine. And then I have 3 rules. You want to balance the intensity of the bar with the intensity of the wine. So you don't want a really big, bold Cabernet and a really big, bold, dark chocolate. It's just too much in your mouth. My friend describes it as 2 divas screaming at each other in his mouth. So that won't really work very well. You want something that pairs nicely. The other thing is you want to balance the sweetness. Now, when you contrast the sweetness, you can find some really great pairs, but when you're starting, balancing is best. And then you want complementary or contrasting flavors, which is what I mentioned about the flavor notes. I will say that finding things that contrast actually can make a better, more exciting pair, but it's more difficult. Finding things that are complementary is a lot easier, but it might not be as fun. So what I typically do when I'm looking for good pairs, I either go to a winery or I open a bottle at home. I usually take some sips of the wine and kind of get an idea for the intensity in the body of the wine, the sweetness of the wine, and then the flavor notes in it. And then I go to my stash of chocolate, which admittedly is probably larger than yours. I have at least 200 bars open at any given time. And I pick some out that I think will work. At that point, like usually they work. And what you're looking for is the magic combination where they taste better together than they do separate. So I'll usually pull out 4 or 5 that I think will work. And I've been doing this for a while, so I'm pretty good at it. I usually get one. If I don't get one, then I go back to the open chocolate bars because chocolate lasts quite a bit, which is the next question. And then I pull out what I would call wild cards. So things that, well, maybe that'll work and maybe not, like we're just having fun experimenting here. Let's just try it. Some of those are the best combinations because, again, they're contrasting. If none of those work, by that time, like my palate is, we call it palate is shot. You really can't taste anymore. Palate fatigue is the fancy word. And when I get palate fatigue, then I just go back to enjoying my wine and chocolate separately for the rest of the evening. No harm done. You can still enjoy both products. The next question was storing chocolate. So technically chocolate will last forever, plain dark chocolate. There's nothing in here that will go bad. Cacao butter is a very stable fat. So just kind of as an experiment at this point, I do have some chocolate that's 11 years old. It does have a little bit of bloom on the outside because the temperature isn't perfect in my house. The bloom is fat or sugar that's come to the surface and is completely safe to eat. So that's not a problem. And that chocolate, like when you put it on your mouth, there's a tiny little bit of bloom, but as soon as that melts, then it's perfectly fine chocolate again. So to store it though, I store all of my chocolate in Ziploc bags. I know it should be a little bit more sustainable, but that's what works for me. You want to store your chocolate somewhere away from strong odors and away from big temperature variations. So a lot of people like in the chocolate industry have a wine fridge that is specifically set aside for chocolate. They can keep the temperature steady, like a cooler would work. Your cabinet will work just fine. You just want to make sure it's not your spice or your coffee cabinet because cocoa butter will also absorb any odors that is around it. So if you put all of your chocolate right next to your coffee, now all of your chocolate is going to be coffee scented. And that's the other reason you wouldn't put it in the fridge. Condensation forming when you move the chocolate in and out of the fridge is not great for the texture of the chocolate either. You don't want water and chocolate, they don't mix well, but mostly you don't put it in your fridge because like maybe last night's Thai curry was absolutely amazing, but you don't want all your chocolate to smell like that. All right, so that's what I've already opened. Do I have a favorite mainstream chocolate? Ooh, I really don't have a favorite mainstream chocolate. I do like the other one that I carry that's available easily is Beyond Good. But I like their Madagascar chocolate. Not a particular big fan of what they're doing from Uganda right now. You might like it. It might be your favorite. But I really like their Madagascar plain dark chocolate. All right. And with that, it looks like we're done with questions. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the chocolate, and please feel free to reach out to either me or Confetti if you have any other questions about chocolate. And I'll turn it back over to Jerry.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. That was an amazing presentation. And as a chocolate lover, I look forward to adding some of these other varieties to my regular rotation. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We love spending time with you while learning something new, especially something as interesting and delicious as that was. We love working with you every day and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you, everyone.